If you go on to Wikipedia and look at a list of Olympic medalists for men in track and field, the last time a non-black athlete won the 100 meter was in 1980, when 60 different countries boycotted the Olympics. For the 200 meter, 2000, and the guy before him was in 1989. For the 400 meter, 1980. 800 meter, 2004. But it's not just track and field. 70% of basketball, 54% of tackle football, 42% of the English Premier League, nearly every marathon runner for the last 50 years. Black athletes simply just dominate sports. And it seems like the more natural athleticism plays into a sport, the more likely it is to be dominated by black players. So the question is, why does it seem like black athletes dominate sports so much? I'm your host Dylan, and today I'll try to answer a question that has lost countless ESPN analysts their job. I'm not here to make any claims about racial supremacy or inferiority, but trying to figure out what differences might exist for something that's literally tied to genetics. First, I'll look into whether or not black athletes actually dominate sports, how culture plays into the differences, and, more controversially, how genetics may be in play, hopefully dispelling a few myths while I'm there, and being able to bring a light on what's actually true. I'll see what the science, the research, and the data has to say, and keep my biases out as much as possible. As is tradition in this channel, if I make any mistakes in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll make a pinned comment with any corrections. Alright, I know I already went over a whole bunch of sports where black athletes dominate, but am I just cherry picking data in order to make a point? Well, kind of. In football, over half the players are indeed black, but 70% of quarterbacks who took a snap were white, and 97% of punters and kickers were white. However, nearly every defensive position on the field is 80% plus black. But if you look at swimming for an example, just 4% of the US men's and women's swim teams are black. 8.9% of tennis, 1.5% of skiers, 13% of snowboarders, the list could go on and on. Hispanics dominate football and baseball, Asians dominate table tennis and badminton, blacks dominate basketball and most football positions, and whites dominate swimming and tennis. Obviously, this needs to be taken into account with a grain of salt, as there have been newer developments to all of these. Quarterbacks are becoming increasingly diverse. Women's gymnastics has seen uptick in black youth, likely due to star players like Simone Biles. But now that we've established that some races dominate some sports, it's time to look into why these differences might exist. And first, we have to start with the culture, because culture influences everything. How people greet each other, who they marry, what they eat, and yes, what sports they play. So when we look at Black American culture, the question becomes, what social and historical conditions tilted black boys to dominate in certain sports? Obviously, we must start with basketball. Most national sports leagues from the 1950s and before were segregated, sadly, meaning black players never had a real shot at making it big in sports before that time. But that didn't mean no sports were played. Instead, sports were something to rally around versus something that could change lives financially. During the early 1900s, black YMCAs and churches in cities like Harlem and Chicago began running youth leagues for basketball. These weren't about fitness, they were all community centers, safe havens in segregated areas. By the 2010s and 30s, all black teams like the New York Renaissance, also known as the Wrens, became cultural icons. When the NBA finally integrated in the 1950s, basketball became more than a game. It was a ticket out, a shot at escaping poverty, limited opportunity, and systemic exclusion. An NBA contract could change a person's life. But not only one person's life, but uplift an entire family and an entire community that saw potential in that player's career and did what they could to help him. And because of that, that player would then invest in the community. And this actually happens more than I first thought. LeBron James builds schools and other programs in Ohio and Cleveland. Chris Paul invests in Winston-Salem State University in North Carolina. Patrick Mahomes funds youth programs and scholarships through his 15 and Mahomes Foundation in Texas. And these are just a few of the names that your average American is gonna know about. This doesn't include one of the backup corners making a few million on the Lions, or the 7th man on the Boston Celtics, who makes decent money and is still likely able to give to the community. Each person giving back to the people that were influential in their success in the first place. And this creates a powerful feedback loop. The more a community values a sport, the more kids play it. The more kids play it, the better they get. The better they get, the more the community invests in it. Over this time, this cycle defines a generation, turning a pastime into a cultural identity. And once you've built up an identity like this, the power of role models can't be understated. It's human nature to look at people that are in a position that you want to be at, and ones especially that look like you. Studies show that across all races, we tend to find inspiration in the successful people that look like us. So when black kids see celebrated, professional, wealthy black athletes, they dream of following the same path. Michael Jordan and Allen Iverson in basketball, Walter Payton and Michael Vick in football, Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson in boxing. Each of them didn't just play, they inspired generations to follow in their footsteps and to achieve the same thing. But cultural inspiration isn't the only story. The most practical thing to keep in mind is accessibility and cost. Black Americans have historically earned less than any other group in the United States, which automatically makes most sports harder to access. Sports like skiing, golfing, snowboarding, these are sports that require thousands of dollars in gears and lessons and travel. And unlike most team sport games like these don't have a lot of school support that makes fairly cheap accessibility to the sport, like a football or a basketball or soccer. Even if many black families had the money, the vast majority of black Americans either live in the South or in urban areas where snow and open space for tennis courts or huge areas for golf aren't necessarily super common. And that makes basketball and football, once again, the perfect sports. It's cheap, space efficient, and fits the environment. All you need is a ball and a hoop, or a football and just some space. Something you can find on nearly every street in rural Alabama or urban Chicago. While for skiing, $1,000 on the equipment, $50 an hour for lessons, and they're $25 every time you go and ski. Tennis, you need to have court access. You basically need coaching in order to be competitive, and money on rackets and tennis balls. Even a sport like bowling can be too expensive for many families to manage. So you end up with a map of accessibility where culture and economy meet. If a sport costs more than a few $100s to get involved, it's gonna be dominated by people that have the wealth for it, which happens to be mostly white and Asian. That's why basketball, and increasingly football, became cultural cornerstones of Black America. They were sports of possibility, cheap to play, easy to access, and rich with examples of people who look like them that made it big. And when success is both visible and feels reachable, you've got yourself a recipe for a cultural, generational sport. All right, now we dive into the controversial section, possible biology reasons. Before diving into this section, I'd like to make a few things clear. The belief that certain races or ethnicities are inherently superior to others fueled some of the darkest chapters in human history, from Nazi Germany to European colonization to the Rwandan genocide. That's not an exhaustive list, but these few examples were, at least in part, driven by warped ideas of racial hierarchy and biological destiny. So when we talk about genetics, we all just gotta acknowledge that biological variation doesn't mean you gotta believe in racial supremacy. That being said, it'd be inaccurate and untruthful to not look at how biology might have an effect when race itself is genetic. So let's look at what the data actually says. Some researchers have suggested that people of African descent, on average, may have physiological traits like higher oxygen intake or increased lung capacity that could theoretically improve endurance or power output. However, these findings are far from settled. Other studies show no measurable difference between racial groups to account for environment, training, and nutrition. Where you can see some patterns is when you look at the concentration of certain traits in specific populations, not entire races. For example, the majority of elite sprinters have large amounts of West African descent, from which research has found a higher concentration of fast twitch muscle fiber, the kind that contract quickly and tire easily, but provide explosive speed. Now, if you ask me, that sounds ideal for sprinting sports like the 100 meter. It's no coincidence then that basically every world record holder of the last 25, 40 years or so can trace some of their ancestry back to West Africa, even if they find themselves born elsewhere, like Jamaica, the US, or the UK. But flip the map and you'll see an opposite trend. Another group of Black Africans from the area around Kenya and Ethiopia are some of the best long distance runners in the entire world. Studies show that up to 95% of marathon finishers come from this region in Africa. Some point to physical traits like longer legs relative to total body length and leaner builds that make long distance running less exhaustive. But the fascinating thing here is that West and East Africans both fall underneath the same racial group, at least in the US. Yet their athletic specializations are completely opposing. That's because, interestingly, Africa, as the genetic birthplace of humanity, contains more genetic diversity inside of its continent than with Africans compared to the rest of the world. That means two random people from different parts of Africa are going to be on average more distinct than someone from Europe and Asia compared. And that's the main thing here. It's not that sports performance is necessarily a race thing, but there's definitely an influence of where the population comes from, and it doesn't fit into the socially constructed race ideas that we have in the US. But then we also have to include epigenetics, which is basically how genetics express themselves through training and environment. Two people might have the same potential for athletic performance, but one's upbringing and training conditions and diet can unlock those, while another person who doesn't get those things don't unlock those abilities. As an example, look at Louisiana. State has produced an absolutely astronomical amount of NFL wide receivers compared to other states. You've got Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., CeeDee Lamb, Devonta Smith, Odell Beckham Jr., all from the same region of Louisiana. There's no single Louisiana gene that explains this. It's a mix of environment, opportunity, culture, and population. So while genetics probably plays a role in athletic performance, it's never the whole story, and it doesn't fit cleanly into the American ideas of race. The truth is far more complex, with a blend of biology, history, geography, and opportunity that creates elite athletes of today. So the evidence for society and culture is much stronger than the connection to race. Environment, finances, family, friends has much stronger evidence for influencing who becomes elite athletes. However, there is evidence that Africa, being the most genetically diverse place in the entire world, will have a higher chance of producing certain populations that have advantages in specific athletic abilities like sprinting and marathon running. And because they both have the same color of skin according to American ideas, it's hard not to notice the overrepresentation of black players in sports. Now, if you didn't know this, there's more categories than just race that affects who becomes successful. There's also gender. If you didn't know, female leaders are actually pretty rare in our world, and especially across history. And well, it might not just be because of sexism. The answer is not what you're expecting. You can see that video right here. Now, don't forget, society is important. Go to Louisiana if you want to be a wide receiver in the NFL, and think controversy. I'll catch you over in this video right here.